All right, here we go. It's time once again for Apostles Corner on the podcast. Today we are very blessed and fortunate to have one of my spiritual sons on today, and we're going to talk about it. And we're going to say, let's talk about it. Today we're going to talk about being the children of slaves and the effects of the post-traumatic slave syndrome. And we already have been having some sidebar conversation, and I know this is going to be on and popping. So one of the things I want to do, first of all, is I want to give kind of like an introduction, and we talk about who are we. You know, when we talk about who are we, you know, as black Americans who come from many different cultures and origin, not all black Americans considered or classified themselves as African Americans, although we are all from African descent, Haitian Americans, Cuban Americans, etc. Thus, we will use the term Black American to use as an inclusive term for all Americans of African descent, as opposed to African Americans. Marcus, I do have a question for you when you get ready to dive into that. I heard this term today. One of the colleges here, they created a scholarship, and they're creating it for people of color. I have a problem with that term. Who are we talking about when we say people of color? Because aren't we all of some kind of color?
Yes, sir. Normally, when people classify groups into color, they're denoting race. And as we know, race is a social construct that was created by men to marginalize group of people, to classify people as groups of people in ethnicities as more superior and others as inferior. So historically, the lighter you were, i.e. white, you were considered the superior race, whereas people of color, any people of color, were considered inferior. So in the popular narrative, when someone says people of color, they're referring to non-whites.
Wow, that's kind of
the minority population of the United States.
Wow, that doesn't make sense to me, and I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense to me.
Yes, sir.
It doesn't make sense to me because you use the term people of color. Well, right. White people are of color. They are of color. Granted, right. It may not be brown, red, or whatever, but they are of a color. So to me, when you say people of color, and I understand the construct, but to me, you're really kind of marginalizing the African American or people that are not white, and you, like you just said, you're making the ones that are white the majority and a greater degree of when you talk about color. Just like everything that's when you talk about black, everything with black is always bad or marginal, and it makes so when you use the term black is void of color. But then you want to use people of color, but to use the black and say black is void of color, and it's one of those side things that just kind of rubs me the wrong way. So I guess I'll pray about that one. I just don't like the term people of color.
Right, and I agree. So like if you're looking at any historical literature or anything like that, and when you see race come into the picture, you see where it developed and originated from. It originated with no scientific evidence, no scholarly research, and most of it was created by unqualified people to speak on matters of genetics and DNA or whatever. Mm-hmm. So when you see that, those things, those concepts, i.e. color, introduced to categorize people, you see where the narrative has shifted from, okay, let's take people from one species, the human species, and then let's divide them and subdivide them into categories. So we're going to do it by color. How do we keep people down? How do we marginalize? How do we relegate people? All right, so we'll create this thing called race, and so we'll say we got the white race, we have the black race, the brown race, the yellow race, or whatnot. So when they did that, they start classifying and categorizing people and say, okay, if you're black, your skull is shaped a certain way. So all black people, according to these theorists, had a certain skull shape, and if our skulls were shaped that way, then we were not smarter, we were not more intelligent than somebody who was white, who had a different shaped skull or something like that. So I believe that the term people of color was probably introduced a little bit later to be more politically correct than to continue to call people, by the racial descriptors. But as time progressed, now we're in the 21st century. Even though we know black, when you're looking at all of us, black Americans in general, we're different shades of skin tone and skin hue. So, but we're at a stage now where race is not going to ever go away. Even though it's developed and constructed by men, European descent, for the most part, if you're looking at the literature, we're too far gone to say that we can't use race anymore. So every document that we use, in the United States, when we're taking, demographical data, the first thing you see on there, it'll say, what's your name? Then it'll say, what's your ethnicity or race?
Yeah.
So it's going to ask you if you're African American or black, or you could choose to not specify. But every, major document that we use at this point in society, we use race to collect information. So, people of color, again, it's racially constructed. But in the popular society, that's where they kind of use it as to separate the perceived dominant majority class, which is the white class, from everybody else.
So when we look at that, then we are saying that as Black Americans, we bear the burden of our ancestry.
Yes.
And all that systematic slavery and all that systematic stuff that impacted us by 400 years of slavery and oppression in this country. And when you got congressmen who said things like slavery was a necessary evil, you continue to perpetuate this thing about us being less than, and it was good that, it's almost like that in the Bible where he said it was good that I was afflicted. So in other words, they're saying, well, it was good that y'all had to go through that because it was a necessary evil. And how do you say that with any understanding to make that comment to say that it was a necessary evil? You oppressed people, you hung people, you abused people, you raped people, you created mulatto families because of that, and you're saying it was a necessary evil. And you talk about this great country, make America great again. Well, America was built on the back of 400 years of people being oppressed in this country.
So when I hear, our national leadership and people at the highest level of government, mention things like that, and even more specifically, people who are not Black Americans mention things like that, that tells me that there is still a misunderstanding on their part. There's still a level of ignorance on their part, because 400 years ago, 1619, when we start really seeing the evolution of slavery in this country, when the first slaves arrived, we know that from 1619 up until the emancipation, this country was built on the backs of slaves.
Right.
So when we hear terms like that, that still leads me to believe that we got people in the 21st century and in leadership that don't want to admit that the harshest sin of this country, which was chattel slavery of Black people.
Yeah, you're right, and that's one of the things that is and that's why it's hard for them, I think, to understand, and they try to identify. You can't identify with something that you can't even have a construct for. You try to marginalize it, and you try to make it so that it doesn't sound as bad as it was. But I don't care if the Europeans did come over here and were indentured servants. They didn't suffer the same kind of trauma that we did over the 400, Black Americans did over the 400 years of their oppression and their slavery, which ultimately really kind of led to post-traumatic slavery syndrome condition that still exists even today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you take a look at it, like I said, 400 years, right? People commonly say, "Oh, slavery was so long ago." No, it really wasn't. I'm doing my family tree right now, and you can see that you're only several generations away from having relatives that were in bondage.
Yes.
So, slavery, 400 years ago, no, that's when the first slaves came, but slavery wasn't even over, slavery was over, 100-something years after I was born in 84. So that's not even that long ago. So when you back that up, in my lifetime, my great-grandmother, who I knew, was born in the early 1900s. And I guarantee you that when she grew up, she probably knew former slaves. So when people say that slavery was a long time ago, it really wasn't. You got generations of people who came in contact with, the last remaining slaves. And then the 400 years put us in a position where we're still looking at the fallout of today, i.e. being the children of slaves, meaning that the Europeans had a 400-year head start on us. So when we look at today, and we want to understand why, we have a high percentage of poverty, where we're still socioeconomically disadvantaged, we still have fewer opportunities, and opportunities for advancement in anything in society, and we have people who are disillusioned and say, "Oh, this is America, you got all the opportunities in the world." No, you really don't. We're still behind. You have 400-year head start on us. We're still trying to play catch up.
Right. And you mentioned that, and then let's talk about this. When we're like 13% of the total population, but our mortality rate is disproportionate compared to other races and ethnicities that are in the United States. And we have a 5 to 7 year less lifespan now than whites in this country. At one point in time, I'm looking at at the generations, especially my aunt and my uncles lived to be 100 years old. So you go back, and then I look at my grandmother. So if I go back 100 years for them, and then I go to my grandmother who was a sharecropper, and I go back to my great grandmother who was actually a slave, then like you said, it's not that far away from where I am right now that I can go back to where I had a relative who actually worked on a plantation under a master who they call boss.
Yeah. So, when you look at the life of black people, of black Americans in general, like you said, we only still make up a fraction of the country, but we die at a disproportionate rate as compared to white people and other ethnic minorities. So, I have some statistics and some of the literature that I have that breaks it down to show the disparities, the health disparities amongst the major racial ethnic demographics. And what's more shockingly is that black men have a shorter life expectancy than anybody else. So the 5 to 7 years less than whites, that's on an average of combining both black and black men and women. But if you further break that down, black men have a shorter life expectancy than black women. So we can probably look around our family's history, and there's a pattern of seeing in our families that men usually die, black men usually die faster than the women. I mean, most of my grandmothers outlived my grandfathers. Yes. And when you think about what contributes to that short life expectancy, there's a number of health issues, health-related issues that have implications that lead to, relatively premature death, as compared to the perceived predominant class, which is the white class, and heart disease, diabetes, to name a few.
Yes.
But then when we break that down and when we go further in detail, the question is why? Why is it that we have some of the same illnesses and diseases that other ethnicities have, but we die faster? That's the underlying question that we should be asking, right? But then some things that pop to my head, and I had a conversation with one of my colleagues in my PhD program today, who's in a healthcare provider, and we discussed the same topic today, right, because it came up in a conversation she had. So one of the things that we were bouncing off back and forth off each other was, okay, what leads to this cause, right? So some of the issues, again, we go back to the post-traumatic slave syndrome and everything that correlates with that. disparities, socioeconomic disparities. You might have, classes of African Americans and other Black Americans that don't have healthcare insurance.
You're right.
You also have a history and a pattern of Black Americans being averse to going to the doctor, especially Black men. Black men don't like to go to the doctor, and the historical record shows that. Something can go wrong with us, and we'll try to push through it, and we don't want to go to the doctors. Sometimes there's other issues that deter us from going to seek healthcare. Perceived disparities in healthcare treatment. Are we going to be treated the same as other ethnicities when we go into these hospitals? Do we get the same quality of care? Those are questions right there that have to be addressed when we think about what contributes to the 5 to 7 years shorter life expectancy.
Well, I'm thinking back to when I was growing up. I never went to the doctor or the dentist until I went into the military. Too fake. They gave you a home remedy. I got hit in the head with a rock. Could have had a concussion, but they put ice pack on you and put you to bed, which was really the wrong thing to do. And I don't even know if my father had any type of medical health care at all. It wasn't until I got into the Marine Corps that I even knew anything about going to the doctor or the dentist or anything like that. So I have to agree with the fact, and it's true. I mean, even today, I don't like going to the doctor, even though I have an excellent health plan that I'm paying a lot to have. I don't like going to the doctor, and I'm trying to figure out what makes us that way, though. I mean, do you think it's because of historical data, or is it because we're just men who just don't like go to the doctor?
Well, I think there's a probably tradition, right? There's probably a reason, underlying reason why we just don't like to go to the doctor. And again, when my colleague and I was talking about this today, she brought up a good point that history shows that back in the day there's been several cases of both Black men and Black women that have been emotionally, mentally scarred by going to doctors. Trusted people who they trust as healers, right? And we have evidence, that going to the doctor ain't always in your best interest. You think about all the times that Black people were experimenting on, the Tuskegee experiment,
right.
Or when Black women were experimented on for to come up with procedures that are specific to women. So history shows that those things right there may have an impact on a Black person's willingness to want to go willingly to the doctors or to see healthcare providers, because in the past that ain't worked out well in our favor sometimes. And I'm not saying that that's a excuse to not go today, but post-traumatic slave syndrome,
right?
It's perpetuated, it's passed down. These things don't just happen. We have a generational cycle of these things from parent to child, from grandparent, from everybody involved in the community. It's passed down throughout the line. There's a lot of other things that may have occurred 200 years ago, and we're still demonstrating those things today. And again, going to the doctor may be one of them.
And I keep thinking about my dad. No matter what was wrong with my dad, he went to work, because not going to work meant not getting paid. Not getting paid means less money coming in, which means we would have to suffer on some end. So to be out sick or to go to the doctor to find out that you're sick was being a bad thing, meaning you couldn't go to work. And I noticed that my father my dad never went to the doctor at any time of me growing up, and I never saw him going to the doctor at any time. However, my mom would go, but my dad or my uncles would very rarely go. And one of the things that I think about is when we talk about as a people, as Black Americans, and one of the constructs we look at is that when we grow up, and well, everybody else can say failure is inevitable. They teach them that you may have mistakes or you may fail, but when we look at us as Black Americans, failure is looked at as a failure is going to be, I'm not going to make it. That's it. I failed. That's it. That's the end of the line. And we're being told that we'll never be able to succeed. And sadly enough, a lot of times we're told by our own people, why are you dreaming to be like that? Why you think you're going to be a doctor? Why you think you're going to be a lawyer? Why you think you're going to do this? It's because, once again, going back to that post-traumatic slave syndrome, we believe, like in the barrel, we want to keep everybody down and thinking that because we don't see it, it's not possible.
Right. So, it's one of those things, the fail to succeed paradox, right? So we as Black Americans mostly get it from two angles, as you already had stated. We already have to battle society and trying to figure out how we're going to navigate systemic oppression and marginalization in this country. And then we also get smacked in the face by our own people sometimes. So when you're growing up, I just use myself as an example. Growing up, West Side Montgomery, predominantly Black side of the city. It was just one of those things where when I seen, for the most part, all my leadership in school, my teachers, other educators, everybody looked like me. So, I had motivation. They told me I can do great things. Then I transferred to a predominantly white school. I didn't have that same love. And I felt like, from some of the words that were said to me in certain classes, microaggression at its finest, obviously, it wasn't overt as it came out, but now that I look back in retrospect, they were clearly microaggressions that told me as a young Black man that I wasn't going to succeed. Going up to recruiters that were white wouldn't give me the time of the day when I wanted to, show interest in services. It only took recruiters that looked like me to say, hey, I'm gonna sit down with you and talk to you for a minute. So sometimes I looked at it from a perspective of, are you trying to see me fail or are you trying to see me succeed? But then you fast forward to adulthood, and then now you see it's very prevalent. I mean, even with social media, we turn on social media and all we do is we see each other tear each other down. Mm-hmm. We already got the world trying to tear us down. Why do we have to tear each other down as well? It's just we get it from two fronts. And as you mentioned, the crab in the barrel mentality. So the literature that that I used in the last course, Posttraumatic Slave Syndrome, by Dr. Joy DeGruy. That's one of her topics in the chapter on children of slaves. She talks about the crabs in the barrel mentality. Every time we see someone rise in the community, in the Black community, there's always several groups that are conspiring to tear that person down. Oh, I don't want to see that person shine. I don't want to see that person rise. I don't want to see that person get that education. I don't want to see that person get that promotion. I don't want to see that person start that business. I don't want to see that person start that church. And the first thing we do, we tear them down instead of uplifting them and knowing that, hey, that's going to be great for the community. Because if that person rises, we all rise.
Yes.
But instead, we don't do that. And again, you tie that back to history, right? You tie that back to the time of slavery, when there was a slave that rose through the quote unquote ranks of slaves, right? He may have went from being a field hand to working in the house. Or he could have been going from a field hand to assisting the overseer. So there lies the mentality of the overseer, the overseer mentality, where some Black people don't like to see other Black people rise because they don't want to see them in a position that's better than theirs, because their conditions are going to be better.
Well, I mean, I guess it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was reading a book and I was thinking about it hit it from a different perspective when you talk about the field and the house. Going back to Malcolm X and his conversation about field and house, how the people were programmed to say our house, we sick, as opposed to being detached from the people that they're working, and you become, it's almost like the Stockholm syndrome. You become enamored with your captors, and now you're on their side, even though they are the ones that's oppressing you, because it looks like they're for you when in reality they're not. You're right though. When I got in the Marine Corps, it was a black Marine Corps recruiter that got me in the Marine Corps. When I was going to junior high and high school, elementary to junior high, it was all black. All the teachers looked like me, and it was, hey, you can do great things. Segregation came, and I was bused to an all-white school where we were 1% of the population. Then the whole construct was different, and we were looked at as less than. We wasn't really given the same kind of love as everyone else. And if we had a F or failure, it was because of who we were, not because it was you didn't study. So I understand that understanding of being pushing. But I think the thing that helps some people, though, I know it helped me, is I had to come to a point where I had to tell myself, regardless of what anybody else says, I'm gonna make it. And the reality of it is, it came from someone telling me that you're better than this. And it wasn't until someone telling me that I was better than this. And really the really strange thing about it, it was happened to be a white homeroom teacher in the 10th grade. She was young, so maybe progressive, I would venture to say. Who told me, because I was acting out, and we know how we are when we don't feel like we are being what we need to be, we start acting out to cover up the fact that we're not feel that we're being taught, or we don't feel like we're being recognized. So I acted out, and after school the lady told me that you could do better than this. You're far more intelligent than this. Why are you acting like this? And for the first time in my life, the light came on, and it made me realize that if I was going to be successful, I had to get past all of this people telling me what I couldn't do.
Right. And that's all it takes at the end of the day. All it takes is to tell that person, especially Black Americans, because we're already conditioned to think that we're not going to be great in life. According to the theory of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Mm-hmm. So we already have that embedded in us somewhere. It may be lying dormant, but it's there, because when we look around, we don't see a lot of people that look like us in positions of authority and influence. Mm-hmm. So all it takes is one person, whether that person is white, black, or whatever, to tell us, hey, you can be great. And then we got to take ownership of that as well, and take advantage of, whatever support and ally that we have to help us get to those positions and navigate those channels. And then we need to pay it forward. We need to go back, and we need to tell the next generation that, hey, you can be great, despite your socioeconomic conditions, whether you're advantaged or disadvantaged, you can be great. So if we continue to pass that around the community, we'll break the generational cycles of, thinking that we're going to be failures in life, and we will see more success come to fruition as a matter of, following that course.
And what if I could to add to that is that as parents with children, if we start with them young, telling them to pursue goals, dreams, or whatever they desire, no matter how crazy some people may think their aspiration is, because there's nothing that with a lot of motivation and preaching and telling them, hey, there's going to be a hard road, but if you stay steady to the course, there's nothing that you cannot do. There are going to be obstacles along the way. Everybody's not going to be for you, but that doesn't mean you can't make it. Because I believe one of the things, and I think Miles Monroe said this, and it bears repeating, the grave is the richest place in the world.
Yes. Because
there are so many dreams, businesses, all kind of things that did arts, songs that were never done because people went to the grave full of everything and didn't go out empty. And I think that's what we have to try to perpetuate in the Black community, is that we have to get past all the rhetoric, get past all of what's going against us, and start looking at, I don't care what the temperature says, I'm going to keep on pushing. because we know all this protesting is good, and I'm not against it. But what do we do after the screaming is over, after the signs have been torn away, after they done walk, after the Black Lives Matter on the wall, on the streets have faded? What have we done to make social changes, constructs, or systematic changes that's going to affect the next generation?
Yeah, on that one, we gotta use what the ancestors, intended for us to use, right? And today it's just great that we're on this podcast talking on this subject, on this very diverse subject. But I watched 2 documentaries of John Lewis today, and seeing like everything that he fought for, him and his colleagues fought for during the 50s, 60s, all the way up to today. The one thing that continued to resonate in his message was the power of the vote.
Yes.
And he was saying how important it is to vote, because that's the most powerful nonviolent tool that you have. And and it's crazy, because like as we look back in history, we see people that died, and fought and walked miles just to vote. And then you see today people say, "Oh, I'm not casting my vote." No, that vote is important. But what's more importantly is a young brother had made for example, a young brother had made a video, a Facebook, I saw it floating around on Facebook, but it was a video about voting. And he prefaced the video of saying that voting ain't important. But then as the video progresses, he changed the paradigm. He shifted the narrative and told you why voting was important. Then he goes and tell you, don't just focus on the executive branch.
Yes.
And then you also need to be looking at the local and the state offices as well.
Yes.
So how do we affect change going forward? One, we need to get out there and we need to be active in the communities in which we serve and live. That's one. When we do make it up out of those conditions, we need to give back and get in the community and try to increase the opportunities there.
Yes.
That's another one. Exercise our civic duties and responsibilities. And also we need to also get back to the mentality of raising our kids that they can be more than basketball players. They can be more than actors. I mean, yeah, those are very good jobs or whatnot, or professions or whatnot. But tell your son and daughter, hey, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be a judge, you can be a chief of police. Because how do you get equal footing if you don't have representation in those areas?
Right. And then the other part of that is we need to hold the people that we put in office are responsible for what their promises they made, and we don't do that. We vote people in office based on a political system rather than are they promoting the rights that I want. And then if they say they are and they get in office and I vote for you, then you don't stand up to what you said, then I need to hold you accountable for what you need.
Right.
All right. Well, I could talk to you all day long. You got me stirred up in here today, and I thank you for this awesome. We didn't stay on the script, which I'm glad. I just wanted to, because like I said, let's talk about it. And I think today we barely scratched the surface of what our country is dealing with as it deals with social injustice and everything else. But I think that we brought forth some thought-provoking things for people to think about, and even some action items for people to do that will be beneficial as we move forward in this upcoming year, and even in this upcoming election year when we go and vote, and making sure that we're voting not because someone is a Democrat or a Republican, but are they good for what we want to do. And once they do that, hold them accountable for what they say they're going to do, and which is, as Black Americans, we have never done, held the political people we put in office responsible for what they say they were going to do. So I really appreciate you, son. You are, in my words of Elder Jamie, you're off the chain. And we're going to have to do this again, because so we're going to have to get you back next month. And we're going to have to talk about some more of this thing that you talked about when you talked about post-traumatic slave syndrome. and getting with the book that you're reading. Matter of fact, what is the name of that book again? Because I want to make sure everybody.
It's titled Posttraumatic Slave Syndrome.
And it's written by who?
Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing by Dr. Joy DeGroot.
Joy DeGroot?
Joy DeGroot. I can send it to you, Apostle.
Okay. All right.
I put it in front of the camera too, so.
That's awesome. That'll be great. Well, thank you, son. I appreciate you for being on with me today. I know it's a 3 hour later than where you are, but I appreciate you taking the time out to be on, and it is an honor to have you. And thank you so much. Looking forward to that PhD, not just a doctor, but a PhD doctor.
Yes, sir.
All right, son. Love you.
Love you too.
All right.